in Johannesburg.
Well, for today's Asia Pacific report, we are exploring ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. This group of countries was established to promote peace, stability, and economic cooperation in the region. But how does ASEAN function, and what are the key challenges that it faces? We'll be exploring the structure, the diversity, and the complex issues that define this important regional bloc. Our guest is Cornelius Damar Hanung, a human rights activist, advocate, an ASEAN specialist with over a decade of experience in Southeast Asia. Cornelius, a very good morning to you, South African time, and welcome to Radio Islam International.
Hello, good morning, and thanks so much for having me today.
Well, firstly, let me ask you to explain to our listeners what exactly is ASEAN and why was it originally formed?
Mhm. So ASEAN, or the long version is Association of Southeast Asian Nations, is basically a regional intergovernmental organizations comprising 10 countries at the moment. Originally formed, like as you said, is to ensure the peace and stability in Southeast Asia, and then boosting economic region and regional cooperation as well. It was founded in 1967 with Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand as the founding members. Then the membership grow to 10 countries at the moment. And then soon, this year in October, we might have the 11th member, which is Timor-Leste. While basically it was founded for peace and security purposes and economic. Of course, the needs to look at the human rights issues are also growing. So that's why in 2009, ASEAN established what they call the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights to look at how the issue of human rights can be mainstream in the Southeast Asia regions. I think if we look at the African Union side, you also have the African uh, Human and People's Commission for Human Rights. So this is particularly basically the same thing that we have in Southeast Asia region as well.
Now, these countries that form the ASEAN, right, they have diverse cultures, political systems, economies. How do they then collaborate effectively despite these differences?
Mhm. Even though we, as ASEAN member states, they have lots of diversity of culture, political systems, economic. Everything is bounded to the founding documents that we call the ASEAN Charter. It's ratified and signed by all ASEAN member states, and it basically um, include the core principle of ASEAN. And one of them is a respect for fundamental freedoms, promotion and protection of human rights, and promote of social justice. And another principle that was mentioned as well in the ASEAN Charter is the respect to the UN Charter and then international law. So by this charter, we should not see ASEAN as a entities working in silo, but it needs to be seen as an entity that needs to work with different mechanism, including regional and international as well. And then recently, ASEAN just adopted what we call the ASEAN Vision 2045. Is it a roadmap on what ASEAN will achieve in the next 20 years? It envisions how ASEAN, even though with diverse culture and political system, should be a more agile, responsive, and more decisive on making a decision, particularly in a rapid and in an emergency situations. So, despite the differences, there should be a willingness, a political willingness to abide by this charter and the standard.
Now, ASEAN follows a principle of non interference when it comes to the internal affairs of its members. How does this policy then impact issues like human rights, particularly in countries such as Myanmar?
Mhm. I think I'll start with the misconception of how we see the non-interference principle, particularly in ASEAN, because non-interference principle are everywhere. Even it's in the UN Charter, and I believe it's also in the African Union Charter as well. But non-interference originally was established for respecting the territorial integrity and stability of countries to be free from interference for their domestic affairs. But there are gray areas that have not yet been codified in the non-interference, particularly on how, if there is any human rights or grave violation cases in the regions. And we've seen that in the UN, in African Union as well, the mechanism have moved beyond the non-interference principle, because basically respect and protect human rights are under the Universal Human Rights Declarations are responsibility of everyone. So looking at that, non-interference principle in ASEAN is not different from what is codified at the UN and at the African Union as well. However, there is a lack of political willingness from the ASEAN member states to move beyond this understanding, particularly when it comes to human rights situations. Because in ASEAN, we have different regional economic cooperations that basically, if we see the basic principle of non-interference is already breached the non-interference principle. But when it comes to accountability for human rights, ASEAN have been cherry picking the situation. And this is basically what's happening in Myanmar, because it's particularly devastating to see how the crisis have not yet been meaningfully addressed by ASEAN, despite they have the 5-point consensus and then any interventions. But it seems that they're not willing, and they have no political willingness to go beyond what they have agreed in 5-point consensus and shield themselves within the non-interference principles. However, there are different instances or perhaps different initiative by CSOs at the moment to call for ASEAN to move beyond its non-interference principle and to be more meaningful on addressing the situation of Myanmar. That's also the works of civil society, including Forum Asia, doing at the moment.
All right, Cornelius, thank you so much for your time and for chatting to us on Radio Islam International. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Have a great day. Go well.
You too.
Talking to us from Indonesia in Jakarta, we have Cornelius Damar Hanung, a human rights activist, ASEAN specialist with over a decade of experience in Southeast Asia. And he joined us this morning on the Asia Pacific Report to speak about the ASEAN bloc. Time now for the latest headlines after